Hello everyone and welcome to the Sure Art Podcast. I'm your host Ross Baxter and today's guest is senior concept artist Ben Nicholas, who's a concept artist at Montreal Ubisoft. It's now episode 10 of the series, so let's get straight to it. How's it going, Ben?
It's going well. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. It really means a lot having you on. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your journey and seeing what we can do to help students with this podcast. So before we get into the podcast, as always, so we explore a lot of different areas as usual, covering student education as a whole. However, for today, one of the main things I want to cover is actual mental health, and also discuss about Ben's journey as an artist, so discussing his times as a student, and where he is now and so forth, where he's worked, and what he does, and I guess what he's passionate about. And then on top of that, what we're going to be doing differently with the Student Art Podcast from now on. It'd be great if everyone who's listening in to actually share your portfolio links in the description below. And what I'll do at each of every podcast from now on is I'll start sharing everyone's artwork and getting people, I guess, more attention. Basically getting the attention I think they deserve, because there's a lot of artists out there that I think deserve a lot more credit. And one of the great things that Ben does is the art share, which I believe, Ben, you run on a Friday. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's every Friday. I'll start the hashtag, just hashtag art share on Friday. And so like the goal, I mean, it's like you said, it's basically to bring attention to folks, especially like people of color, like LGBTQA folks, and like people whose art does not get near as much attention as it deserves, and to like bring the focus on that. And so like I retweet everybody's work to about 20,000 followers, and then everybody else retweets that work.
Wow.
And so it's just a way to kind of like bring the focus onto people who like deserve it, and it's for people of like all skill levels. So I'd encourage everybody to participate.
Awesome. So everyone, once again, that's every Friday. So, and make sure to go follow Ben on his social medias, and also at ArtStation. He's an incredible artist, and I can't wait to talk about his journey. So let's just get straight to it. So Ben, who are you? Tell us a wee bit about yourself. The big question, straight in there. No pressure. Have fun with it.
I'm Ben Nicholas, human being.
Step one.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm a senior concept artist in the games industry. I've been working in games. It's been a while now, because I think I graduated when I was 24, 25. So it's been, I don't know, it's been like 6 or 7 years now working in games.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's funny, like I originally wanted to be a journalist. When I was in high school, I was like, I loved writing. And I started teaching myself 3D when I was probably like 12 or 13.
Wow.
I had a friend, a really good friend of mine, still a good friend to this day, who handed me I think it was like a cracked copy of like Bryce 5, and built me like a really ramshackle like Mad Max kind of computer of just like random parts that he could find. And so I taught myself 3D on the side, and it wasn't until I think towards the end of high school, like my senior year, was when I realized like, actually, I don't want to be a journalist. I want to make art, and I want to make art for video games.
Awesome.
I took a year off after high school, and then went to college. Went to the Art Institute of Portland, and was there for the 4 years.
Okay.
And after that, worked for companies like Adidas, 343. I was in the UK for a bit, Creative Assembly, and then now I am here in snowy Montreal, working at Ubisoft.
Brilliant. Awesome. One of the awesome things I've always loved about your artwork, and obviously your journey as well, is how diverse it is, and like the range that you've covered. I'm not sure in terms of how much depth obviously you're allowed to go into based on just rules and so forth, but in terms of like, it'd be great to hear about maybe what you did. Obviously, not too much depth, just based on what you can do and can say and so forth. Like, where was it you started out? Was it Adidas?
Yeah, it was actually. I mean, I had freelanced through college here and there, and I, because I got linked up. Portland's like a smaller city, but I met a couple of other freelancers there. And started networking a lot when I was in college. And so that's how I did some freelance gigs for Nike, and for Apple and some other places. And I had my first internship. I think it was my junior year of college, and like the internship really didn't turn into anything. Like I was there for like a few months. Wasn't really taught anything, and then like the place collapsed.
Right.
It was like this web design place that I was
Okay.
just doing like I was doing graphic design for them. And I was like, I'll take any internship, like anything. I just want to
Just to
get
get
in
rolling.
and work with some people. And it's funny, like I didn't really gain anything out of it except for one really key thing, which was the boss of like this tiny studio said, if you work here, you have to have a Twitter. He
Really?
was like,
Right,
day
okay.
one, you have to have a Twitter, like right away.
That's mental.
And
Right, okay. I've never
yeah,
heard that
it's
one
so
before. That's a strange one.
no. To this day, I've never worked with anybody quite like him.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Twitter was basically how I started networking even more and getting more
Okay.
freelance gigs. And so that's a very long build up to several months before I graduated. My name was out there enough that I was contacted by Adidas,
Mm-hmm.
and Adidas's North American headquarters is located in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. That makes it nice
That's
and
really
easy.
funny. Yeah, no, seriously, and it's super funny because you have essentially like Adidas is on one side of this river, and then Nike's headquarters is on the other side.
What's
like
the chances
Nike's
of
like,
that? The
Yeah, right.
competition side by side. Trade secrets,
So,
trade secret.
No, totally. And it's funny. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, they trade employees back and forth like all the time.
Yeah.
But it was a very funny thing. Like they were looking for. They had a very small 3D team that was like two other guys, and they were looking to kind of start this thing up. And I remember being like very honest in the interview and saying like, like I don't play sports. Like
Right.
I'm very much into video games. Like I'm a big nerd and
Yeah,
I make
awesome.
robots. And they said, that's fine. They said, I mean, you've worked for Nike, you've done this freelance and like, you think it'd be a good fit. And so I got the job and I worked there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
The first year was essentially working with these two other guys to build a pipeline for designers, for footwear and apparel designers,
Right.
to let them design in 3D. Because typically those product designers were working in Photoshop and mostly like Illustrator.
Yep.
And so we want to get them to work in 3D because it was easier to do than like 3D prints and mock-ups. And so it's like, hey, you can design your product, get a 3D print out, and to be able to see it. And there's something about like the physicality of holding a product you've designed that really changes everything.
Definitely. So was there
and
like
so-
oh so,
No, go ahead.
So like when it came to obviously you got the position at Adidas, and obviously like the whole dream, the whole goal, I guess, was getting into games and so forth. And when it comes to obviously the industry these days, they're very, I guess, I think maybe it's just based on my own experience in terms of like what they look for. Like for example, you said about experience there that you were just looking for like internships as just like trying to take anything you could.
Yeah.
When it came to Adidas, did that, I guess, make it easier for you to get a job in games?
It's yes and no. I think I at the time before I got into games, there were people in games who didn't understand how experience at Adidas would be relevant. I
Okay.
ran into a mixed thing. Some people who understood why and other people who didn't. And I realized that part of the skill set that I had to learn trying to break in was how to vocalize and explain the things that I'd learned. And that I realized that I needed to be the one that made a case for why my experience was valuable and meaningful. And what that turned into was like my second year at Adidas, I was mostly focused on conceptual design for products, like for footwear. And so I did a lot of footwear and like a lot of like rapid concepting. And the way I learned to vocalize that and to kind of to share that knowledge when I broke into games was during interviews. I'd say, look, like I spent this time at Adidas, and the thing that I learned the most was design, which is true. Like there's a difference between being an artist and a designer, right?
Definitely, yeah.
I remember being an artist in college and going to school with designers, and I regret this now, but like at the time I didn't understand why designers were spending so much time agonizing over like whether a line on a product needed to be like half a millimeter
Oh
or
my god.
like a full millimeter. And I was
Yeah.
like, what a waste of time. I was like,
Yeah.
I could sit here and make a bunch of robots and cool spaceships and do all these things. And it wasn't until my time at Adidas that I came to understand like how valuable that design process is, like that attention to detail. The other thing I said during interviews was like I learned how to establish visual languages. Like Adidas is not that much different than say working on Halo. If you work on Halo, you have style guides for the humans and the Covenant and the Forerunner and so on. They each have their own visual language that comes together to form this cohesive world. And at Adidas, it's not that different because you have your product lines and say like I'm going to be working on like this brand or this type of basketball shoe, and we know that in the previous lines it's had this kind of sole on it. It's kind of had this kind of top. Like you want to respect the legacy of those shoes that came before while still iterating on it and making it relevant.
It's like
and
maintaining
so
the style.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, it was like Adidas was like a crash course in learning design for somebody at the time who like kind of resented design and wasn't that interested in learning it. Like that was a really big changing point for me. So I in some places it helped me get in some places like I really had to kind of like fight a little bit and like not fight, but I would really have to like explain and make a case for why it was relevant.
I think like one of the main things when it comes to concept art, and one of my former lecturers was actually doing a lecture about this in the capital of Scotland in Edinburgh, and basically one of the main things that when it comes to portfolio for concept artists, I think is always like the debate is like obviously like what's required and so forth. But the great thing of what you're saying there about having that understanding of and appreciation of of design is like obviously design's important, but it's like getting the balance of being a designer, being creative and being flexible, and not being afraid to explore new shapes and so forth. Like one of the main things he was teaching at the lecturer was basically being messy and exploring being messy and like not caring what happens on like on the page, because like one of the other things I love about your artwork is the fact it's like you're so bold, like you just explore and like you try different shapes, and like one of the main things I've seen in your artwork that I think is great for artists to learn from is your exploration with color, because it's like you've got all these different variations going on, and like me as an artist, so my main specialty is in environment art. However, I would say that I still haven't taken like those bold risks that you've. I guess I'm not sure if it's in intention, but it's just like you're just having fun with it, and it's great, and it's like awesome seeing like all these different, like for example, one of your what's it? It's a motorbike concept piece.
Yeah.
And it's like basically it's like the yellow and then the bold red background, and it's like all these different colors and shapes that you're playing with, and it's like that's where like the kind of separation between the designer and the concept kind of like divides, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, for one, like, thank you so much. Like, that's incredibly humbling and nice to hear. Like, I appreciate that.
That's okay. What are you saying?
So there was a key phrase in what you said where you said, are you just having fun with it? Yeah. And I think that's really it. So the color, I think the experimentation with color really came from my time at Adidas, because there was a lot of experimentation with really, really bold and bright colors. Like a lot of running stuff was like neons and whatnot, which I don't play around with too much, but it made me more comfortable with kind of breaking through those color barriers and what's kind of expected. And I also think like, I mean, I also remember playing a lot of games at the time that were really like, I remember playing a lot of like brown shooters, like a lot of shooters that were nothing but like brown and drab, and there's a time and a place for that. But I remember internally feeling like a bit of a sense of rebellion against that and really wanting worlds that were colorful and interesting. And I'd also been influenced, like my dad and my brother are really into like old sci-fi books, and they introduced me to it. And so I always grew up with all of these sci-fi books from like the 60s and 70s that had these very like psychedelic colors, and were all like, a lot of them were like very abstract. And so I think being around that material made me a little bit more comfortable and a little bit less hesitant.
Definitely.
I also think, so I think there's two real big aspects to that experimentation in my art. And one of it is Part of it is kind of out of boredom. Like
Okay.
I have an innate desire to want to keep playing, and if I get stuck in a style for too long or in a certain approach, I will want to break out of it and want to try something different. And I've realized that out of that and just having fun and letting art be an act of play, growth comes naturally out of that.
Yeah. I
And
completely agree.
yeah, and for me, like there's times where I don't like working on something just for the sake of, oh, this is going to lead to growth. Like that's not fun and that's not interesting to me.
Yeah, like that's always been, I guess, like the main thing with me. Like I've never understood the philosophy of just trying to get to somewhere, but doing art just even though a studio wants certain art style, like say they, like for example, my main interest is film. So for example, if I'm wanting to go to Frame Store and say for example they want this and this in their portfolio in terms of what they expect based on the current films that they're working on, then obviously I'm going to work on something similar to that, but I'm going to want to enjoy making it. And
Yeah.
the biggest mistake I see in so many portfolios is that so many people are making such a diverse range, but they're not necessarily enjoying it. And it's like I prefer, like there's no point me wasting my time, because at the end of the day it's all about, like I've always prioritized enjoyment first, and I only learnt that once I finished university. Like obviously when I was going through college and university, I enjoyed what I did. Like I was trying to make sure that I was always having fun, but I don't know, it was just I've made it less like stressful like on myself. I've become more relaxed about it. And
Yeah.
I've just tried to enjoy it and make sure that's always that's always been the main focal point of my art.
Well, and that's the key thing. So I really think I being an artist, I was telling this to somebody the other day, like being an artist in games or in film or wherever, like it's something that you need to really love
Yeah.
in order to do. Because you could do a job that's so much easier and pays a lot better and is a lot less stressful. And so one of the key things that if you're going to build this career is you have to constantly have fun and fall back in love with the act of making art.
Yeah.
Like art needs to be something that when you make it home or you work on something, like you love it, like you care about it. And so I think you have to do anything you can to preserve that fun aspect and like your passion for what you do. And it's something you have to be like pretty defensive of,
Yeah.
because it's at times, and even in my career, where I've lost that passion and lost that drive. Like it can be incredibly detrimental.
Yeah. I think one of the main things with me was learning how to be patient and
Yeah.
understanding how important patience is in regards to not just skill development, but just being comfortable with yourself. Because
Yeah.
everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but you, myself, like and many artists out there, like everyone wants to strive to do as best as possible, and you work yourself so hard that it comes to a point that the funding gets taken away. And
Yeah.
when I finished university, one of my main priorities was to step back and just think about, right, so there's a certain art style that I need to get to, there's a certain level I need to get to, but there's no point me rushing it and just trying to force artwork out there just for the sake of it. So learning patience really, I guess, kind of grounded me in a way. It gave me, obviously you don't get too comfortable, that's the main thing. Like you don't get too comfortable, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's those kind of, it's the whole idea of balance, I guess.
Well, and it's one of those things of like I think when you say I want to get to a certain level, you realize after a while that like that goalpost constantly moves.
Yeah.
Like that goalpost is constantly shifting away, and so you never really like make it. You never really make it as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
There's never this moment where you're like, oh, finally, like this is it.
Yeah.
All of these years, I've finally worked to get to this point. Like that day just never really comes. Like you realize, I mean, even for somebody like me and plenty of other people I know in this industry, people have more experience than I do. You still struggle with self-doubt.
Yeah.
You still struggle with looking at other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
Both people have more experience or people have less experience. You see some kid who just is still in college and he's making what you feel like is better art than yours. And you sit there and go, what am I doing? So I think after a while you learn that like this bar for like making it doesn't really exist. So no matter I had somebody I've had people online say, well, you have X amount of followers and you get this amount of attention. Like, how can you be upset or how can you feel doubt about yourself? And like, no amount of that affirmation changes like your self doubt or your like crippling anxiety about the kind of art that you're making. And so, for me, like the way that I learned to cope with that was it was realizing that I wanted to make art for myself. That I go into work and I do my job and I love it. But when I come home and I do a lot of art on the side, all of those projects are for me.
Yeah.
Like I don't necessarily. It's not that I don't market them. Like of course I market whatever piece I do and try to get it out there. But when I'm in the act of producing that stuff, I do it because it makes me happy. And the bonus of that is by having fun and making this, I'm growing organically. And for me, it's the same way as working out. If somebody asked me to work out, that sounds awful. Like it sounds horrendous. But if you could mask working out as something else, as something fun, I'm probably going to be into it. It's like I don't like problem solving for the sake of problem solving.
Yeah.
But if it's problem solving disguised as a game or something fun, then I'm much more inclined to engage with it. And it's the same way with artistic growth of like, I'm not going to do this thing consciously or just for the sake of, oh, it's going to make me a better artist. I am going to do it and find a way to put my own twist on it, or I am going to just realize that growth comes organically out of experimentation and play.
Yeah, it has to be natural. Like when it comes to like for example, the idea of exercise. So I love going to the gym and stuff, but my main thing is like I have the most random soundtrack of all time. Like it goes from like Disney to like Terminator to like hype music to like anything that is a song that's going to make me feel great, and then I just get on with it. Like that's my natural way of going around it. Whatever makes me get the job done in a fun way, that's what I do. Like randomly like a decent song will come on and boom, I'm just like hyped and ready to go. And
see,
like,
that's perfect.
Like that's my way of getting the job done. Like that's like the other awesome thing as well, because like so I've been following your artwork and so forth on Twitter, and like seeing like for example you've just finished your 5 weeks of making your like your mecha characters, and it's like also like you can just see just for example just the variation and just like the like we said earlier, like the exploration and stuff, and just how you can tell you're having fun with it. For example, no matter whatever you're doing in life, you just got to enjoy it. And like I've never let anyone affect that decision. Like like some people may think it sounds cringy or whatever, but life's too short. You got to make the most of it. It's one of my favorite quotes as well.
I think that's absolutely accurate. Like it's like I said, I think if you want to be an artist, like you really, it's tough. It's easy to lose sight of it. I think when you're in college because there's so much pressure. But it's something you really have to maintain, like your love and passion for, and realize that making art is a lot of fun. And you know, it's when you get to the end of a piece, like I find that's the least fun. Like it's
really
like,
okay.
When it's done. Yeah, because it's kind of like, it's not to say, I mean, I finish a lot of work, but like when it's done, it's like it was the process of making art that's the most fun.
Yeah, it's
like,
the learning curve part.
It's kind of lucky that for me, like finishing a piece is kind of a bummer, because it's all the more reason to go back and make another piece and enjoy that process again. Like it is the most fun.
But that's a great thing when it comes to being a concept artist as well. Like obviously any artist can do this in terms of like you can start creating as many art pieces as you want, but because of that ability to always wanting to go through that process, you're constantly learning, because you're starting you're doing something fresh. It's a whole like a blank canvas. You're starting again, and then you can like go crazy and have fun with it, and that's what makes it worth it. And
Absolutely.
I guess that'll be actually another good thing to talk about if you want to briefly is workflow in terms of, so before we get into the main discussion of student education and mental health, I guess one of the main things all artists always look for is this workflow. So if you could maybe briefly go into as much depth as you can on like how do you work, like what software are you using, and what tends to be your go-to?
Yeah, so like historically, I was mostly like a Max user, and then the last few years, I switched completely to Blender.
Oh, right, okay.
And so that's all I do. Like all my modeling is done in Blender.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason for that is so there's a few add-ons like Box Cutter, Hard Ops. There's like the Pie menu, like Wazoo Pie menu, and a few other add-ons that completely. It's for me like the fastest modeling program I've ever used,
Okay.
including like Modo and whatnot. Also, like each of those add-ons is anywhere from like $5 to like $25,
Mm-hmm.
which is dirt cheap. And obviously, Blender itself is free. The other like bonus of that is I can put my Blender in a Dropbox, and anywhere I go, no matter what computer I go on, there's no installation with Blender. So all I have to
Is
do
there
is
not? Right,
download
okay.
the folder. Yeah, there's not.
I didn't know about that. Right, okay.
So basically just download the folder and I click on Blender and I can start working.
Blender to me, so I had a harsh sort of judgment on Blender when I first got introduced to it, but I think it still doesn't get the credit it deserves because based on like one of my friends from university, he loves Blender. He's obsessed with it, and is it Blender Cycles or something? Like
Yeah,
the
that's the
rendering,
render.
it's like I'm hearing a lot of growth coming through that. Supposedly that's meant to be really good. I've not explored it just yet because my main thing that I'm doing at the moment is V-Ray. But
Yeah.
when it comes to, I think Blender needs to get more, I guess, more attention because I think everyone's still stuck in the loop of, like, even I'm sort of a person who's, like, I've always been stuck in the same loop of Maya and 3ds Max is just, it has to be. Like, in my mind, it just seems the go-to.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have not, I guess, realized that the industry's got a lot more relaxed in the sense of software requirement. They're not so strict as they used to be. Like ZBrush is my other favorite. Like I'm obsessed with ZBrush. I can't beat ZBrush.
Yeah.
Sculpting is life. Like
it no, I absolutely agree. Like, and to be totally clear, like when I started Blender,
Mhm.
like those first 2 weeks of using Blender, like I wanted to break my keyboard in
Yeah.
half. Like I thought it was like a pretty like I really didn't like how it worked, but I saw how fast it was,
Mhm.
especially with those add-ons, and that's the key thing. Like the thing that sold me was stuff like Hard Ops specifically as an add-on was just unbelievable. And it also kind of grew out of my frustration of I've been a Max user forever, and like those Max updates each year have not been great.
Okay.
And I feel like have slowed down a lot. And so I instead like 3ds Max has become a software that feels, and Maya up to a point, feels like two programs with a bunch of legacy stuff left in,
Mhm.
and it's kind of hampered by its own development because it's been going on for so long. Whereas Blender feels like pretty lightweight. It's extremely fast. It's really shortcut heavy. Like,
So it's really efficient overall. Basically, it makes you as a concept artist not have to stress about the technicalities. Basically, in a way.
absolutely. And the thing is I'm not a super technical guy. Like
Mhm.
I'm not. And so for me, but I'm a really good modeler. And so for me, like
Yeah.
one of the things is I just wanted tools that made modeling faster. So to talk about like my overall workflow, and I'll touch on the programs I use, is I kit bash a lot. And for me, what that means is it starts off with I will, when I'm bored and not feeling super creative, I will grab a bunch of reference and I will sit there with a show on one monitor and some reference, and I will sit there and model what I see. So it could be hardware from like hardware sites, tools, bits of sci-fi that I like from other people's pieces,
Yeah.
reference from movies, and I will sit there and model just little bits and bobs. And so I build my kit bash scenes, and then those give me something to pull from when I'm doing concept work.
Okay.
And so then I will do like each piece is anywhere from like 75 to like 100% kit bashed. And so I might do some custom pieces and use my kit bash parts together. And it's basically playing with Lego. Like that's
Awesome.
my workflow. It's very similar to how a lot of model makers, I mean, still work in some cases, but worked on like Star Wars, or like Aliens or whatnot. Is it's like those guys would buy all of these like model kits from Japan or the US or whatnot and filled with like tanks and motorcycles, and you just pull bits and pieces together and glue them together. Like it's the same concept just in 3D.
Are are you so for example, when you're doing all these concept art pieces, do you give yourself like a tight deadline, or is it normally, obviously because it varies so much based on, I guess, when the deadline is, but when it comes to, like, say for example, the pieces you're working on at the moment, you've been like rapidly just trying to, like, you're been creating the concepts really quickly. But
Yeah.
do you like stick to a certain time limit for a piece, or do you literally just go with the flow?
I go with the flow, but usually more often than not, I won't work. I won't take longer than 2 or 3 evenings to work on something.
Wow, right.
So almost all my pieces are done in 2 to 3 evenings. Sometimes one if it's going really well. And the reason for that being is I like playing with a lot of different things, and I have my workflows down well enough that I'm confident that I can get something done in that amount of time, and I still have fun with the process. I get to make something, and then I get to put it away and start up something new.
So,
I
oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. No, it's totally fine.
So would you say, like, for example, so since obviously my portfolio requirements are, I guess, maybe slightly different in regards to students, but this is one thing I've never actually asked before, so I might ask this now. Do you think it would actually be a good thing for people to say on their ArtStation or their website or whatever they're using for their portfolio to, like, highlight how long it's taken them, like, or
Yeah,
would you say that's a negative?
I actually think no. I think that, I mean, if it's a time, if it's if it's a period of time that you're proud of and that you feel good about, then absolutely put that on there.
Right.
Because I mean, here's the thing about working in the industry is a lot of times you won't have all the time in the world to make the thing that you want to make. Like, there can be some crazy deadlines, and sometimes it's pretty relaxed and you have plenty of time to work on something, and sometimes you don't. But the thing to understand is, like, when you pick up an art book, most of the concepts that you see are like really good marketing material.
Okay.
Like, a lot of concepts that are made on a project are really dirty and like quick and messy, and aren't like, some pieces turn out amazing, don't get me wrong, and some pieces just don't, and it's something that you need to make fast to quickly communicate an idea. Like, that's the purpose of concept art. It's like some quick and dirty stuff to say, hey, here's a quick mood, or here's how something fits together, and so on and so forth. Like, you're problem solving. And like, that means you need to be like, you really need to be quick and efficient when you work. And the same goes for environment artists, is it's all about being fast and efficient. And so I think definitely something that a lot of places look for, and I look for as well, is seeing how quick somebody is.
When it comes to artwork, I think one of the, like, I was listening to an actual one of my favorite podcasts is a podcast called The Art Cafe.
Yeah.
And when I was listening to this podcast, because, like, I love concept art, I'm obsessed with concept art, and basically what they were saying was that there's so much artwork concept artists make, but they never show, because they know that most of their artwork is based off pretty pictures. Like, people judge them based on how pretty their image is. And so all these, like, ones that show how creative they are aren't being shown. And I think it'd be really cool to see more of a progression on, like, websites such as ArtStation and all these major ones, showing, like, their actual, like, step-by-step process, because at least it shows to, I guess, the employer and so forth, or the recruiter, that like, how they've done it and the decisions they've made. But I think people are still kind of stuck in the loop of everything has to be perfect, and like, even I'm a culprit of that myself as well at times, because I'm working on a train environment piece at the moment, and this piece has been taking me months to do because of how big it is. But I also have to realize, though, like, when it comes to getting into the industry, I'm not going to have that privilege. So I need to acknowledge, like, the do's and don'ts and try and be realistic. So,
well, and also, like, there's a different mentality too when you get into the industry and work on stuff, is you realize that it's rarely, I mean, depending on the team size, it's rarely just you working on a thing. Like, somebody else, a bunch of other people are going to touch the environment that you're working on. And so there's a lot of trading hands and going back and forth, especially for environments where, especially, like at Ubisoft, where you have, like, really huge teams. It's like, okay, I did this bit of modeling, he did this bit of modeling. These two guys, like, did materials and textures. Like, there's a bunch of people working
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 together.
around touching stuff. And it's the same. I mean, it's the same thing with some of the concept stuff that I do, where I worked on X thing, and then a 2D guy came over and did paint overs for branding, and stuff like that, and or color passes or things like that. And so there's a lot of like exchange back and forth. But to touch on something that you said about like, I think perfectionism holding people back a little bit. For me, like one of the things that broke that was making a lot of art really quickly.
Okay.
Because I will be absolutely the first one to say that if you look at my portfolio, there's some pieces up there that are totally not up to snuff,
Right.
and are not, like, they're not perfect, they're not amazing, they're not exactly what I wanted them to be. But it was more important for me, and this is just my personal belief in how I work. Like, I wouldn't. Something I want to clarify about a lot of things that I say is like that's my perspective.
Of course.
And just because I broke into the industry doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it, or it's particularly the right way to do it. It's just kind of how I became comfortable and how I work. For me, it's been more important to finish a piece and to just be done with it, and then I can take that lesson and move it on to something else. And part of that comes from like impatience, because I like to play so much with different projects. Like, it's funny, like you talked about this mech character series that I'm doing, and like,
Yeah.
I've one more left. I'll be honest, like I can't wait to be done, because like I
can move on.
I usually don't do long series, and it's been like 3 weeks of doing these characters, and I'm ready to do something different.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you want to call it done and pick up those lessons and apply it to something else. But I think for some other people, like it can be really, I think especially when you're in school, it can be an easy and dangerous route to fall down of being a perfectionist and not finishing something in your portfolio, when it's better to go through that process of making something, whether it's environment art or concept art or character art. Like, go through it over and over again, because the more you go through it, the more you memorize it, the faster that you get, and the more you realize, oh, these tools aren't working. Like for rendering, like I used to be a V-Ray guy for a lot of my rendering, and I realized I wanted something that was faster,
Okay.
simpler, and easier to iterate on. So all my rendering is done in either Keyshot or Octane.
Keyshot is
depending
great. Yeah, Keyshot. Yeah, you can't complain about Keyshot. It does its job really quickly for you and produces a great result.
It's super quick if you want to do like a quick vehicle render or something like that. And then I've started using Octane more and more. So I use like Octane standalone.
Okay.
And that has been like a fantastic process, and it's easy to set up environments. And after a while, like I ran myself through the process of rendering out something over and over again and getting a bunch of pieces out, and then was far enough along to know, okay, I want to change shortcuts to this. I have like this library of X to speed things up. Like, you learn what you need and how to speed things up, but the only way you will get to that point is just by making a lot of things.
It's been open to being like, you have to accept that failure is good, and like just keep failing. The more you fail, it's great. It means you're getting somewhere, because like without it, you're not going to progress. So
and another key thing is like everybody reviews portfolios differently, and some people share like criteria, and some people don't. And for me, like one of the things I look at when I look at portfolios, going back to what we talked about earlier, I can usually tell when somebody's has had fun making a piece or not, or whether they're doing it because in order to get into X studio, I need to make this. And I don't like that a whole lot, because if you're a good artist, you'll probably be able to adapt to a range of styles. And for me, one of the things I look for is, when I look at portfolio, I want to see that person's voice. Like, who are you as an artist? Like, what do you like? And does that show in your portfolio? For me, I love color. I love a lot of like old school sci-fi from the 60s and 70s. Like, awesome. Sometimes I love spaceships from Alien that are super greebly, and sometimes I like something that's well designed. Like,
I like your style.
I appreciate it. Like,
can't beat it.
I like playing with all of those different things, and for me, when I see somebody's portfolio, I'd love to know who they are as an artist, and I want to see work that reflects them, because, like I said, not everybody shares this perspective, but for me, when you hire an artist on board, one of the reasons I'm hiring them is because they have a perspective and a viewpoint that I don't have. which makes them invaluable in discussions or feedback or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
where they have something that they're bringing to the table, an experience, a life experience, an artistic viewpoint that I don't have.
Yep.
Um,
No,
like
that's awesome.
I think I think that's really really key. And so for me, it sucks a little bit when you see people who really try to tailor their portfolio all the time to certain places, because then
You're not
there's a
giving
bunch of
yourself
other people.
options. Yeah,
Yeah, and
you're
you're
limiting
also
yourself.
and you're also seeing, like, as somebody who reviews portfolios, like, I'll be honest, like when I review a portfolio or any team that I've been on where a portfolio was sent out to say, hey, can you give feedback on this? Or hey, we're thinking about recruiting this person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're staring down the barrel of having somebody look at your portfolio for about 30 seconds, maybe a minute.
And you want to impress
Right.
them. It's like you don't have much time.
You really don't. And it's not, and a lot of it's because there's a lot of portfolios to look at.
Yep.
There are so many, and you get flooded. It's not people trying to be rude or anything. It's just things are really busy, and so those portfolios have to have an impact. And when you have a bunch of people who are all tailoring their work to a certain place, you end up seeing a lot of the same artwork over and over again. Like, even when I was in college, like there was a tendency for people to make. Honestly, it's so weird. A lot of people had crates and barrels in their portfolio.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Oh my god, yeah. It's like
It's funny because if you look at ArtStation, you'll see the trends. Like,
Yeah.
you'll see what everybody's like really into at the moment.
like guns. Guns is like one of the most common ones, and
Yeah, and it's nothing like, I have a huge respect for weapon artists, but you
Of
do
course.
have to you do have to stand out. And like, there was a time where like every environment artist I knew had an AK-47 in their portfolio, and it was like, after a while, like, no matter how good the AK-47 is, you really don't want to see that again.
yeah, you see it so many times. And another one is shields. Like to me,
Yeah.
like seeing shields all the time. And I think when it comes to student education, because since we're now bringing up the topics, we can start tailoring the main questions of the podcast, and then we'll talk about mental health as well. But when it comes to, I guess, the idea of portfolio, I think the hardest aspect when it comes to, well, based in the UK anyway, I'm not sure what it's like in like Canada and America and so forth, but basically it's like, I think people get introduced to the question of what do you like to do too late. Maybe I'm wrong, but do you know when obviously at some point in your life you have to answer the question like, what do you want to do? For
Yeah.
example, in the colleges and education places I've been to, the one advantage I've always had above others was the fact that I always knew what I wanted to do, but
Yeah.
but because of the majority of people didn't know what they wanted to do, a lot of courses have been tailored around normally introducing that sort of mentality in the third and fourth year, or the later part of the course, because obviously they want to kind of like teach the basics and foundation of almost like the broad, like a bit of everything, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Which is obviously really difficult for student what's it called, teachers to do, because obviously they can't teach somebody's specialty straight away because they've got like say 60 to 100 people to teach, and they can only kind of teach so much. So it kind of has that kind of like, it's a conundrum, like it's kind of like a battle between the balance, if you know what I mean. And
No, it was very similar where I went to college, because the way it started, like the first, like, especially that first year and the second year, were like very broad.
Yeah.
And it's, here is like Maya 101. Like, there's a few weeks we're going to do texturing, a few weeks we're going to do modeling, you're going to do some animation, and maybe do a little bit of rigging. And it was like very, very broad. For me, I was very lucky in that after like, I think it was in my second year,
Okay.
maybe even in my first year, I was like, I'm going to be a hard surface artist.
Awesome.
I'm going to focus on hard surface stuff. And I had some people say that don't hyper focus because you'll never get a job. I've had some people say don't be a generalist because you'll never get a job. I've seen both of those proved wrong. Like, I've seen people be very specialist and get jobs, and people who are generalists get jobs. And what happened was, like, I realized I wanted to be a hard surface artist. I didn't decide to be a concept artist until later on in my career, but by knowing that I wanted to do hard surface stuff, I was able to talk with teachers, and basically start switching out and substituting classes. So I did my best to like basically kind of fight for, hey, this is what I want to do. And so I was able to get, hey, instead of doing this rigging class or this animation class, because I'm a terrible animator and a terrible rigger, like I want to focus on modeling, and so let's substitute this in. And so I was lucky enough to be able to kind of customize my curriculum a little bit to get what I wanted out of it.
Because like that plays such an important part in terms of like having that sort of almost control in a way. Like if you have that privilege to be able to switch, that's great. Like we had that option as well when we were at my university, but I'm aware that some places don't have it. Like obviously you're lucky based off where you are and the timing as well of things, but it's a hard subject to talk about when it comes to what should teachers be teaching, because since there's so much things to teach, they have to be realistic to the majority. But that's why when I do these podcasts, one of the main topics I bring in is online courses and trying to understand what's going to benefit you the most. And if you've already gone through education and you're listening and you're, I guess, trying to get your foot in the door, online courses has helped me. So my go-to at the moment is actually the Gnomon Workshop, because it's provided me with the foundation of rendering that I need to get into film in terms of what they're looking for, and based off what my two mentors have like told me what I need to do. And having, I guess, that instant access to information is so much easier than student education in terms of like I can't just go to a lecture every day, whereas the internet's straight there. But there's a lot of things that university has that online courses don't. Like I guess the main thing that has always came up in the podcast is being able to be what's the word? Like being able to be strict with yourself and not getting distracted, and not letting like the mindset of I can do this later, basically. So it's just trying to get yourself in a good balance. And I guess to kind of tailor this into our main topic that I want to talk into is getting that balance. So bringing in like mental health and so forth, and getting the balance between a good lifestyle and balancing between work as well. So before we get into the four main questions, I guess it would just be great to talk about your experience on the topics that you were wanting to discuss about mental health in terms of your journey so far, because I remember you were saying earlier that obviously like you've worked really hard and stuff, and during your education, and that's probably the hardest you've worked, and that was very stressful. And it was the same incident for me. It was a very like I was obsessed with uni. I loved it. I was surrounded by artists. I could do whatever I want. I was just chilling, doing 3D. It was great.
Yeah.
But it was just but for some reason we as students have put so much pressure on ourselves, and the grades for some reason mean nothing in our sort of industry. So it's like obviously you want to focus on the grades, so you want to get good grades, but it shouldn't like stress you to death.
Well, and I think that's it, right? So to be upfront about it, so I struggle with clinical depression and severe anxiety. I've got an anxiety disorder, and I also struggle with PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. I come from a history where family members struggle with depression, anxiety. My dad was a Vietnam veteran.
Oh wow! Right,
and so he did 2 tours in Vietnam, and then did some other jobs, and so has struggled with PTSD in a really big way.
Yep.
And so that in turn has kind of affected the family. So I think the entire family really struggles with PTSD in their own way. But the thing is, like, I didn't really the phrase mental health was something that I never really heard growing up, and depression was something that I didn't understand, and it wasn't. I struggled with all of these things, not really knowing what they were, and it wasn't until I think college was when it really became the worst. That's when I struggled with things like suicidal thoughts, and really it was when I started learning that what depression was. That depression isn't just being sad. The best way I can describe depression to somebody who doesn't have it is it's the absence of hope. Like imagine not having any hope that the next day will be any better or the day after that there's no future. Like that's what sinking into depression is like. And so college kind of set me up to have like a pretty intense experience with those things because you like the college experience is a ton of work. Like it's a ton of work and also constantly working evenings or pulling 24 hours, like constantly studying for exams. And like I talked with my partner Liz the other day, and we were talking about how grateful we are not to be in college anymore because it can take such a toll.
Definitely.
Like I said, I've crunched in the industry, but I've never worked as hard consistently as I did
University
throughout
and college. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I skipped a lot of meals, or like my eating was so random, and like I'll be honest, like it's kind of scary looking back at when I graduated because I think I was 120 pounds, that's 54 kilograms. When I graduated.
It's crazy hearing about what you're saying because your story is very similar to mine. So I had the same thoughts that you were going through, like the sort of battle with suicide and stuff. And when it came to like you're saying about diet, the thing with me, it was the exact same thing. Like all I cared about was work. So I went from 13 stone to almost 13 stone to 9 stone 8 in a space of just a few months. Jesus. And it's like trying to understand. Like it was weird though. Like so, the thing with me is that I was still loving what I was doing, but because I was so caught up with this whole idea of grades being so important, I let that control things, and that's why I was saying earlier when I was able to finish university. Oh my god, it was an awesome relief. Like I was like freedom, time to do whatever art I want. I was like constantly just doing like Harry Potter, like my Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings is what that's my go-to. You're never taking that away from me. I was like obsessed with that, so I was making like my new throne piece, and just the freedom to be able to do whatever I wanted. It was so great. So to hear you saying that as well, it's like it's awesome to be able to like have that connection and to like be able to see like, because it's not like I guarantee you there's thousands of people who are going through this, but a lot of them I guess aren't open to kind of like it's hard to be open about it if you know what I mean.
I think it's extremely hard because it's hard in general because there's so many misconceptions about mental health.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who don't take it seriously, or their advice is, oh, just keep your chin up, or it'll pass, or just like you got to be more positive, or things like that. And for me, like I can't stand that, because for me, when people say things like that, that absolutely undermines how powerful and dangerous mental health issues can be. Mm-hmm. Like you don't just chin up your way through depression. Like,
of course,
you go to therapy, you look into medication and things like that. And suicidal thoughts aren't something you just brush off. Like these are all indications of deeper underlying issues that are worth investigating, and that you're stronger seeking help than trying to just power through it. Like exactly. I've spent so much time trying to power through it in my life, and I've failed every single time. But I think there's an expectation, especially on men, for being like really tough, and you just don't talk about those things and you go through it. And for me, I find that mentality to be super toxic and mm-hmm. really, really dangerous, and it's killed people. Like there are men who have killed themselves because of that, being so ashamed of what they're struggling with, and just being told that you have to toughen up. And I think, I don't know, I think that's absolutely shameful. And so for me, like one of the reasons why I'm very open and like transparent about what I'm feeling is, I mean, for one, like selfishly, like it feels good to just say those things and to get it out.
Of course.
But on the other hand, I remember how bad it was in college and how alone I felt. Mm-hmm. And I didn't seek therapy until like a year after I graduated college. Right. And I had an amazing time in college, but it was also one of the toughest times of my life. Like I had a lot of family issues, and I really struggled. And the thing, when you're transparent about those issues and what you're struggling with, one of the greatest things that you're doing is if somebody else sees that and they're struggling too, they don't feel alone. Yeah. And that's a really, really key thing, because the thing that depression does is it fights very hard to make you feel isolated and make you feel like nobody cares or nobody understands. And so when you have those moments where you realize it's somebody else, that you're not alone, it's a really, really pivotal moment, because it's a way to kind of combat that isolation a bit.
You can progress forward. Like,
yeah, and you also need, like, you need a support network. Like, you need a support network to get help.
It gives you a grounding. It grounds you. It gives you just that foundation to, right, this restart, this refresh.
Absolutely, like, because for me, like, going to therapy, and I've moved around a lot. Like, I've lived in the UK, like I've lived in Seattle, and now, you know, here in Canada, and everywhere I've moved, like, trying to find a therapist in a new place or going through that process can be extremely terrifying. So when you have friends, you know, who are there to support you and to lift you up, helps. Like, when I didn't just do therapy, and it was when I was at 343 that I went to a doctor and said, hey, this is what I'm struggling with, and said, that's when I was like, really, it wasn't just therapy. Like, I was getting diagnosed with depression. They said, this is also like a chemical issue. Like, there's a chemical imbalance here. And so that's when I was put on medication as well, which saved my life. It's a terrifying thing to go to a doctor.
But that's also a great accomplishment, a great strength. That shows, like, how strong you were to get through it. And it's like being able to, I guess, it's so hard for people to not be afraid to, like, let themselves, like, release, like, their emotions and stuff.
Yeah.
And like, that's like one of the biggest philosophies I've always lived by, probably in the last 2 years, is that I don't really care what anyone thinks about me, in the sense that I just make the most of life. Like, I just, like, try and enjoy it to the most, and don't let anything affect me. Obviously, you want to do well, and you've got all these other things that you want to do in your life and so forth. But at the end of the day, I've really switched as a person, and it's just by acknowledging that, just chill. Like, there's nothing to, like, it's obviously, it's hard to say that there's nothing to stress about, because obviously there's lots of different things that affects the daily life. But when it comes to like, the small things matter, if you know what I mean, and it's just being able to, like you don't have to be working 24/7, and like you said earlier, doing, like, crunch time. Like, that's a term that I don't really appreciate anymore, like, because everyone always talked about crunch, and I was similar to you in terms of doing all-nighters, and it's weird. It's like, people, like obviously, when they do all these all-nighters and they work like crazy, they're not always being as productive as they would have if they just went to sleep. Like, if you had a rest, you get more productive. But it's because we're kind of surrounded, I guess, in this philosophy that your career is so important, if you know what I mean, that the grades is going to dictate your life. Whereas I think that's the great thing about art now, in the sense that the way the industry is run is, like, I think a degree only matters if you have to go abroad. Like, obviously it helps with visas and so forth, which obviously it shows that you've done work in that. But a grade doesn't determine you as a person or as an artist. It's just a letter. It's just a system that's been put in order to kind of highlight some sort of stability.
Well, it's interesting, because I think for me, like, it's something that I still struggle with being defined by my art and my output. That it's because it's tangible. I can count the number of pieces that I did, or look at how I grew, and so it's really easy to fall into a trap by defining who you are by the amount of art that you make and by your career. Like, it's something that I struggle with regularly, and I'm still trying to figure out what the answer to that is. And one of the things that I've come to terms with is there has to be a certain amount of self-acceptance. Like, you have to learn how to kind of appreciate you for who you are, with the good and bad and everything, and don't necessarily label it as good and bad. Just all of that is you. It's who you are as an individual. Because I don't know, for me in my life, like, I've always been my worst enemy, and my worst critic. And so a lot of times my life has been just me wrestling with myself. And my own expectations. Like, in college, like, it was a mix of the expectations other people had of me and my own expectations, and that's why, like, I I really, really killed myself throughout college, and it's something that I wouldn't do. It's something that I wouldn't do again.
Yeah.
No, you have to learn to practice like self-care. So I think the first step is to learn to care for yourself if you don't already, and to care about who you are, and then that makes it easier to practice self-care. Because for me, for a long time, like I said, I still, when I have really bad bouts with depression, I still struggle with this of not seeing anything valuable about myself outside of my art.
Yeah.
So I struggle with not recognizing myself as a person of value or anybody that's meaningful, that my art is the only thing that gives me meaning, which obviously isn't true, but that kind of belief creeps its way back in when I'm in a bad place. And so, yeah, it is a process of learning to like love and care for yourself, because if you love yourself, then you're much more willing to take the steps you need to get better and to care for yourself. But it's a process.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That means a lot. And in terms of anyone who's listening, it's like, I think it will really help them kind of step back and kind of look at themselves in terms of just to enjoy the moment and like learn from your experience. And I think it's like you said, it's like when you recognize someone who's similar to you, you appreciate things more, and you get to it makes you feel more comfortable as well, because like you said, you're not the only one, and there'll be other people as well. And I think when it comes to for example, when we go into the final 4 questions of student education that I'm going to talk about, it's the same. So basically, I always talk about the same 4 top questions when it comes to the student art podcast. But I think one of the main things that this topic will, I guess, help with the future podcast is that it'll allow me to share more people's stories, and hopefully I can get some more like other guests as well, just being a bit more open and sharing that obviously nothing's like perfect. And no, that really means a lot, so thanks for saying that.
No worries. And like the thing that I want to stress is, like, for one, especially if you're in college, like we call it college where I come from, call it university where you're at.
We call it both. It's weird. It depends. Like I don't get the difference. I don't understand why we have a college and a university. But anyway, yeah, on you go.
But I think one of the things that made it even harder to struggling with depression in college was like I said, it wasn't knowing what it was, and really not. I didn't understand what I was struggling with, and didn't have a clear definition, wasn't diagnosed. And so there's that, and then there's the fact that college is such a major growing period of figuring out, like, let's put the career stuff aside, but a lot of college is figuring out who you are as a person. Like, people think that that's what high school is for, and it's not. Like, college is where you kind of really I went into college as one person, and I came out somebody very, very different.
Yeah.
And so there's that process of self-discovery and acclimating to like a brand new environment, along with what might be like struggles with mental health. And so that's why I encourage like anybody to like seek help and seek therapy if they can. Even if you're feeling fine, you should go to therapy. Like, I think therapy is for everybody, because you learn so much about yourself and so much about the things that you started believing about yourself when you were very young, like things that might be true and things that might not be true. And so I think struggle with mental health issues is especially tough in college because everything else is so confusing. Like, there is so much growth happening.
There's so much going on,
Yeah, and there's a lot of pressure and an insane amount of stress, like nothing else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you so much. Like I said, so I always, when it comes to the short podcast, I always ask these 4 questions. The great thing is that we've pretty much talked about all these in different ways. So I guess we'll just ask them as best as you can, and whatever you say, I'm sure it'll be awesome. So let's see. What do you wish you learned when you were studying at university or college? Sorry.
I think the thing that I wish I'd learned. Are you familiar with the term like soft skills?
Like software skills, like software.
No. So soft skills is a phrase that's used a lot. It's kind of it's corporate speak for social skills.
Oh, right,
social
okay.
skills, learning how to collaborate, diffuse conflicts, and things like that. And I think that's one thing that I wish I learned more, is that one of the things that you realize breaking into the industry is it really isn't just about your portfolio. Like, your portfolio is about 40 to 50% of it. The rest of it is who you are as a person.
Okay.
And it's also, and part of that is also who you know. Like, that is how to get in. Like, it's socializing, connecting. I was very lucky.
Yeah.
I was very lucky because I made some very, very good friends in college, and that has helped me throughout my career. And obviously, like, they're incredible people that I'm lucky to know. But I think those soft skills are like really important, that I wish I had learned how to deal with management issues or managing other people, how to deal with like internal conflicts within a team, how to help people like de-stress and things like that. I think there were things. It's tough to teach some of those skills. Sometimes you just have to be in an environment to learn them. Like, I think the workplace is one of the best environments to learn because you have to. It can be really intense, but you learn and grow by leaps and bounds.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that.
I think for me specifically, if there had been more game production classes where those conflicts naturally arise, like, it's a way to kind of mimic the experience a little bit. Like, it's never going to be accurate to real game production, but you at least have to force yourself to work with people that you may not like, and people that you really love. And I think both are really important, because you got to be able to learn in every situation. Everybody has to work with people that they like or don't particularly care for, but you have to work together to make there has to be some teamwork there to get something out the door,
to get the job done.
Yeah,
you're the first person so far. So, like, basically, obviously, every guest I've had on so far, they have like their own take on the questions. So that's the first time someone said that, and that makes it even better, because like it's weird. So many people are afraid. I'm just being like, so people in general, like a lot of people, I guess, like one of the main things that people are just scared of in the whole world is like public speaking and like socializing in certain ways. And like one of the great things that I loved about my university, I didn't actually go to them because literally all I did was work. But it's one of the things that they do. So I went to a place called Abertay University in Scotland, and they do a thing called game jams. And like game jams is obviously like a global thing. It's not just Abertay, but that has provided a lot of students with that sort of almost like a wee taster of in-house experience, in the sense that, right, you've got a deadline, you've got a team to work with, and just go with it, see how it goes. No, that's awesome. Thanks for saying that.
No, of course. Like, I think to like expand on that a little bit, is one of the reasons why I say soft skills and things like that is because the rest of it for me, like modeling and composition and all of that, are things that you can easily learn and easily teach yourself.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make going into college is just to expect that the curriculum itself will prepare you for a job.
That was the next question.
Oh, really?
It was literally how did university teach you to be ready for the industry?
Yeah, so I think, like, to answer that, I think that you have to go like above and beyond.
Of course.
And it's not that I'm trying to add work onto everybody's plate, but I think I had a lot of side projects going on throughout college as well. And I think it's pretty dangerous just to rely on, well, I got A's in the curriculum and I got this piece of paper, so that means means I'm totally ready. I think the best people that I knew and still know in the industry were people who were doing extra projects on the side. Like one of my closest friends, Alex Draycott, who he works at Oculus. He and I went to college together, and he is an artist who always had side projects going on, like I did in school. And so it was a way, once again, to stay passionate by having my own projects and not necessarily what the curriculum dictated I needed to give in, which was not something I was always excited about. So it was a way to stay happy and to stay content, but it was also a way to constantly learn new things and to try to stay ahead of the curve. And the other reason why that's important, and I don't mean to disparage like any teachers, but like I think almost everybody who has been in school knows that has had teachers that have industry experience and some who have not been in the industry for a very long time.
Yeah, it's
Or in some cases, with some people I know, have had a teacher who faked being in the industry.
really,
And
I've
faked
never
a
heard
career.
that one before. Right? Okay,
Yeah,
that's an interesting
yeah.
topic. Because like,
Like not well,
wow,
not
right?
to say
Okay,
not to say that happens a lot, but like I was lucky that the people that for the most part I had an amazing group of teachers.
yeah, I was the same. It's
Who were they were part of the art institutes, which is now like almost completely shuttered. Like the art institutes or at themselves are like very crooked and bled people for a lot of money. Like I graduated with
right,
an insane amount of debt,
right. Okay,
but I was lucky enough to be in a class that had teachers who were pushing against that system and really cared for us and our well-being and our future, and were like amazing as a result. But in college you never really know like who's kind of legit and who's not. And so for me, like, you always have to kind of keep teaching yourself and learning stuff on the side
yeah.
to stay relevant.
I think
Because
yeah,
some of those teachers might be teachers full time, they might be doing it part time and might still be working in the industry. But you need to do, like, especially now where all of those resources are available, where almost every big artist I know has a Gumroad and is sharing tutorials and information. Like, there is no excuse not to get that information when it's so available.
yeah, exactly. Because like when it comes to like there shouldn't be any excuses at all because there's so much resources out there. Like obviously it's like we were discussing earlier, well based on what I said, so like obviously teachers can only teach you so much, and like you said, it's important to do the side projects because it allows you, it gets you that extra step ahead, it gets you where you want to go. And at the end of the day, you're obviously not going to be like, if it's a side project, you're going to be doing something that you want to do, and it's tailored towards that thing that you want to do. And I think that's where a lot of students forget when it comes to the student education system, is that they rely too much on the teachers, or they expect, like obviously we expect a good quality of teaching and we expect the right teaching in terms of up-to-date knowledge, because there's still a lot of things that even at the places I've been to that maybe they're not quite up to date, like maybe they're like 5 years behind, and like obviously they can't, like not every teacher can know everything, because all the teachers I had were awesome. Like I completely respect everyone who's ever taught me, they've always done their best. But that's when being independent comes into play, and you have to acknowledge, right, okay, it's the, like I want to go get a job, I'm gonna have to do the work. So
Yeah, because you can't. Yeah, you really just can't rely on that piece of paper that they give you at the end to be the thing that gets you a job. Like
Yep.
it's going to be your portfolio at the end of the day. I mean, to touch on something you said earlier, like I think it's, some people learn better alone and can teach themselves and have the discipline for that, and some people need the structure of college. But one of the best things that you can get out of college is its connections. Not just with teachers who might be able to help you get a job, but other students. Like, never view your fellow students as competition.
Yep.
Because the people I know who did that, like, to be frank, were assholes. Like those people who constantly viewed other classmates as competition, it just led to so much conflict.
Yep.
And you just don't treat people like that. So college is important to gain those friendships and relationships, lift each other up, help each other find work, and be there to support each other, because it can be like a really rough business. So what you want is a support network. When I got into 343, like my job at 343 was because of, obviously it's because of my portfolio, but it was mostly because I knew two people who worked there who put in recommendations for me.
Yeah.
And it was two very close friends from college. And you just never know when you're going to run into those people again. So it's important to have those connections and have those friendships and relationships, because, and don't have those relationships just for the sake of having business connections, because that's pretty gross. And, I've had both students and people in the industry try to use me as a way to get a job, like not even start a relationship, but try to use me as, and like you can tell pretty quickly when that's happening, and it's really gross. Like, you want to be in there for those friendships and relationships, and then based off of like this mutual trust, you say, hey, this person should get hired because of this reason. That's a thing that kind of organically comes out of those relationships. But it's something that's important. Like, it's not just a good portfolio. It's having those connections and having those friends, and networking and so on. And networking is just another way. Like for me, like I said, I don't meet people because I think that they could benefit me in some way in my career. I talk with people because they're interesting, and I think it would be wonderful to get to know them. Like the rest of it is just
Definitely.
an added benefit.
Because that's I'm really happy. I'm loving today's podcast. It's going great. Right. This is going awesome. Right. Because you said so you said one thing that was a big reality check for me. So a point you just brought up. So when so I'm a very competitive person. Sport was my whole life. Like sports, one of my biggest passions. And but when I got to university, I learned how to kind of step back. Like I had to start acknowledging that, right, it's a team thing. And the one thing I struggled with when I first started off was learning to trust people.
Yeah.
Because I always struggled with the fact that I always felt like this is not me being harsh, but I felt like most people were lazy, based on, because I was just so ingrained with wanting to work all the time and doing it like a certain way that I was becoming almost paranoid. And when I was able to step back, I was then being able to do what you said there. So get the friendships and actually enjoy it more. And then things, I got even better because of it, because I was, it was less stressful, because I was more relaxed, because I was with people that liked the same things as me, and I stopped taking it so serious. Obviously, I want to work hard and stuff, but I was able to just approach it with the right mindset.
Well, it's a key thing is you realize, in my experience, the projects that you work on in your career aren't as important as the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
You can work on a bad project, but if you're working with great people, that changes the experience completely. It makes it really positive, and can be super rewarding. Whereas you can work on your dream project, but if the team dynamic isn't there, and
it just falls apart.
It is, or you can ship a product, but it's not going to be a pleasant experience. That product is probably going to come out one way or another, but it's a question of, is it going to be a slog, or is it going to be an enjoyable thing of a group of people working together? And I think
definitely.
it's something to emphasize, because I think especially in games, I think games are one of the most intensely collaborative mediums that exist as far as production goes.
Yep.
You really have to be able to communicate and work together, and especially on smaller teams. You got to be close, and you got to be able to put differences aside, or learn how to deal with conflict resolution and things like that. And that's, I don't know, it's important. People don't realize that. People sometimes in school get super focused on their portfolio and their name and who they are, and don't realize when you get in, it is not about your ego, and it's not about you leaving the project with a bunch of portfolio pieces.
Yeah.
Because there are people that go into a production and are just oh, I just want to work on hero pieces, and not realizing that A, that might not be the case and probably won't be, and two, it's not about you. And if you make it about you and come in with a big ego, or get really competitive with other people, that tends to shut people down really quickly. And it's a way to earn a not so great name for yourself.
You need to get that respect. You need to acknowledge that we're all in it together.
Absolutely.
We're trying to get a goal done, so you want to have fun and
And if you want a bunch of attention for your art and what you're making, that's what your side projects are for.
Yeah.
But when you step into a studio, you are there to do a job. You are there to do what needs to be done, and sometimes what you're told, whether you like to do it or not. And it's just that's how things go. You may have to make art. An art director may make a decision that you may disagree with, but that doesn't change the fact that you need to do it that way. It's not to say you can't have a conversation about it, but you're going to have to do things that you disagree with, and that's just kind of how it goes. And so you need to be able to deal with how you're being managed. It's like I said, it's a lot of soft skills.
Thank you. Right, we've got one more question. I'm sorry, it's actually been a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I'm happy.
Fine. I hope you don't mind.
No, I'm actually happy it's longer. It's great. So this is always it depends on how you take it. So it's not a touchy question, but it's just a question that I ask on every podcast, and it's always the last question. and it's the idea of university versus online courses. So I'm going to tailor this towards you as a concept artist based on what you think, and I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is going to be, but the reason why I like to ask everyone who has a different role is just to get the right perspective, because since I don't have that industry experience, I can't tell them since I don't know the knowledge of basically.
Yeah.
So would you recommend uni over online courses or vice versa?
Oh, man.
It's a big question.
It is a big question, and my answer comes with a lot of caveats.
Yeah.
So I would absolutely recommend university above online courses.
Okay.
But that hinges on quite a few things. I think for me, I'm really glad that I went to university, even though I graduated with a lot of debt that I still fight. I made some really good friends, and I had, like, my work aside and what I learned, I had a life experience that I really, really needed. Like, I needed to go through college and be around a lot of other people, and learn and gain so much that I wouldn't have if I had kept teaching myself at home. And I also, like, I needed that structure.
Okay.
I needed that structure to learn. And so I think one of the key things that college and high school teaches you is, I think, like, when you go through elementary school and into high school and so forth and into college, like, one of the key things, the best thing that you learn is how to learn. It is figuring out how you absorb knowledge and how you can pick something new up. And those are skills that'll serve you for the rest of your life. Like, anytime you're learning something new, and as hopefully, like, as an artist, you never stop learning. Anytime you're watching a Gumroad or checking out other things, you still have this thirst for knowledge, and you know how you need to pick something up. And so it's important to understand, to have those skills and understand their importance. The other part is, I recommend university because it's, like I said earlier, those connections that you make and just those people that you meet. Like, I think it's super, super important.
It's the main part.
The way to counter that is, I would not recommend university if you're in a really bad financial situation. Especially, like, if you come from a lower income background. Like, there are ways to learn cheaply. Like, YouTube is amazing. Like, I didn't have those resources when I was teaching myself, and it's amazing that so much of that is freely available, and it makes my job a lot easier now.
Definitely.
And so if you have the discipline to teach yourself, like, by all means do it. And as far as networking goes, like, Twitter exists now, and, like, that's how I've gotten a lot of my job. That's how I've made a lot of my connections, is Twitter, and it's an incredibly valuable tool.
I'm still like mind blown based on what you said about the guy who said at your job wants you to have a Twitter. I'm still like, whoa, that's a first for me. I've never heard anything like that before. That's good. That's a crazy one. That
it's, you know, it has served me in good stead. Like, a lot of my jobs I got because of Twitter, and so I think, like, you can do that networking online, and obviously there's a bunch of game jams and things like that. And so hopefully, if you choose not to go to university and teach yourself, like, go to those events, talk to those people, like, ask questions, and even ask people online. Like, more often than not, people in the industry are pretty friendly and willing to help. So don't be afraid to just reach out and talk to people in the industry. Like, it can be scary, but at the end of the day, like, they are people. Like, I can, you know, after, like, 7 years of doing this, I can attest that, like, I have a bunch of personal problems, and, like, some parts of me are good, some parts of me are bad. Like, I'm a human like anybody else. Like, you're talking to another human being. Like, it's not that different. I remember, at least in college, being very scared and very, like, reticent about talking to people in the industry. That's awesome. I mean, I would say, like, it very much, it hinges on who you are as a person and what your situation is. But for me, like, college is something that I would do all over. The one thing I will say, is somebody who's moved around a lot and done the overseas moves twice now, is that degree is really important if you plan on working overseas. Like, you have to have it. Like, that is a necessary part of a work permit. There's possibly ways around that, but none that I know of, because I know when I went to the UK, and also when I moved here to Canada. Like I needed it both times. And same with my partner Liz. Like she's from the UK, and she needed her bachelor's and had to print off her degree and like provide a copy in order to get her work permit.
Yeah, there.
So I think if you're thinking long term about moving to a hub, which there's a few of over here, like that's something to think about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. That has been an amazing podcast. I'm really happy with everything that you've said and you've brought new to the table. It really means a lot. And hearing about your story was great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Anytime, you're more than welcome to come on again in the future. just let me know and I'll be there. So thanks again everyone for listening. Make sure to leave a like. Like you said about the art share, make sure to go follow Ben on Twitter and check out his art station. I'll add a slideshow on the back as well of all his artwork, and I'll add the descriptions in the link below. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me anytime in the comments, or even if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn. I don't mind. I'll always do my best to try and help you out. But make sure to press the subscribe button. That'll mean a lot. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and I'll talk to you guys next time. And thanks once again, Ben. Much appreciated.
Hey, my pleasure. Take care.
That was awesome.